Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon from the historical documentary Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. I'm recording this video on All Fool's Day, or am I? By tradition, the pranks cease at high noon, but in role-playing games the fun never stops. There are RPG players who spend their time living out a Tolkien fantasy with mighty quests, epic journeys, high stakes, feats of daring do. And down in the cheap seats there are just as many players engaged in daring don't. To the poor bastard walled in behind that screen at the far end of the RPG table, players are always at it. Players are working up some dodge to avoid the inevitable plot wending their way. The game master knows this and understands it well. But sometimes the mood is one of All Fool's Day, and players actively engage in April the 1st mode against their fellow players, one character taking the piss out of another character. This leads to hilarity. Occasionally it leads to a player's character being stripped naked, tied to the rear end of a train, and painted blue. How do you end up there? Through misunderstandings born of chance. An undiscovered clue might lead to a gap in an adventure, or not. The players could easily skip over the clue and play the rest of the game without great obstacles thrust in the path of their investigation. A discovered clue, though, is a dangerous thing if misinterpreted. Experienced players bank on this idea and, for shits and giggles, invent clues of their own that they drop willy-nilly into the adventure, just to see other players turn on gibbets of their own making as the winds of chance breeze by. This is, to use a technical term, fucking hilarious. Sometimes, as the dungeon master in a bog-standard adventure, you perk up at the arrival of a note from a player. I've covered notitis before. In the long history of dealing with notes from players, I can safely say that most of those notes were irrelevant. Many of them were just notes to say hello, or that this note is meaningless, written during a quiet patch of non-adventuring to stir the shit amongst other players, who then generated a fucking blizzard of notes. That's part of the game too, but there are notes that genuinely stir the shit. There are also awkward pranks that don't require notes at all. How do you deal with this fertilizer in games? You treat it as best you can. Sometimes the hardest thing is keeping a straight face. Let's have an example. This one doesn't involve notes passed back and forth across the screen. It concerns characters moving back and forth along a train. Adventures on a train are tricky. They are literally adventures that run on rails. This makes them easy to derail. I'd rattled off a quick Cthulhu adventure with part of the action set on a train. Work out who the cultist is and stop the strange doings. Easy, right? Wrong. The assembled players sent their characters up and down the train, bumping into each other and engaging in witty banter. Cue strange doing number 1. The players start to suspect something is awry. More banter on the long, slow train that's making its way through steep rails amidst piles of snow. The train stops for a bit while snow is cleared from the tracks, an excuse to break out of the claustrophobic setting and switch over to a vast, isolated feeling. You must do something to vary the pace. Back to it, and the realization that there was another strange doing. Players actively investigate and suspect everyone. For reasons of the plot, the players split up. In the time-honored fashion in an RPG, characters who aren't in the same location are treated separately by kicking one faction out of the room and dealing with players one group at a time until they hopefully reunite. Why do it that way? Characters might not come back at all. This happened more than once in Cthulhu. The year is 1892. Players stare at a map of Victorian London. They have several locations to investigate. Fearing they are under a time limit, players agree to split up and take hansom cabs to their chosen destinations. A rendezvous is arranged. Players are kicked out of the room and dealt with group by group. To avoid rifts in space-time, you deal with the players who head to the nearest location first. If Professor Peabody is heading across the park to talk to a mysterious cove, and Viscount Dandelion is plodding to the other side of the city, deal with the professorial player first. That player might discover something of use to the Viscount and telegram ahead, altering the Viscount's plans on arrival. This sort of time management varies with the technology of the setting, but you get the idea. Whatever nastiness awaits the Professor will happen before the Viscount faces his own struggles across the city. I've run adventures like that in which most of the players make it back to the rendezvous, and they wait for the missing character. Nothing, no show. Something dreadful must have befallen the investigator. The missing player, meanwhile, is still away, rolling up a new character who'll be brought into the game as soon as possible. Players backtrack over the missing person's movements. They learned nothing on their own investigations. If only they'd gone to that peculiar shop together. Now the players head for that peculiar shop, tooled up and mob-handed, ready for a spot of instant justice. The kindly shopkeeper tells these angry investigators that the missing character dropped by, said "oh" loudly as if something vital occurred, and rushed outside to hail a cab. Is that true? Did a player impulsively open a new line of investigation leading to death, without leaving a clue or a pointer to the undisclosed location? Was that sudden cab ride a poor move on the part of the player? Or is the kindly shopkeeper lying through her teeth, and will the players find their dead colleague down in the shop's cellar? When players split up, you'll never be sure that they'll meet again, so kick someone out of the room and deal with players separately. The antidote to this malady is the player tactic of sticking together no matter what. That brings its own problems to games that are under the ticking clock with villains spread across multiple locations. Back to the train adventure. Players decide to split up and keep an eye out on suspects who are at different ends of the train. You have one player at the front of the train and another in the middle. Up at the front, an idea occurs to the investigator, so the player decides to move down the train checking things. Middle player stays put, intent on the mission, keep an eye out, watch for nonsense. Inevitably, the players meet. Meanwhile, there's a third investigator who decides to manufacture a clue, and this player creates a blood-splattered clue with notes on it written in German. That's left lying around to stir up trouble, and stir it does. Paranoid investigator moves along the train and discovers the German note, can't read German, asks around, meets fellow players in the middle of the train for a chat. The player who created the note pipes up, "Oh, I know a little German," translates the bullshit. Paranoid player seizes on the bullshit and manufactures his own sequence of events, tying the German nonsense into the actual plot. I sit there and keep a straight face. The paranoid player warns everyone to be on the lookout for trouble. He sweeps the train again, from front to middle. He's asked the German speaker for a few German phrases that he can drop into casual conversation suddenly, to see how people react, looking for someone who knows German. So far, he's only met one German speaker on the train, a fellow player, and it never occurs to him that the German clue is utter bullshit. Paranoid player has the right idea, though. If the German clue is genuine, it's best to go armed with that knowledge and use it to unmask a German speaker. So there he goes, opening compartment doors and saying hello, terrible weather, and then suddenly dropping "Guten Tag, Fräulein" into the conversation, staring really hard at a random passenger and fingering the trigger of a loaded revolver concealed under a bulky winter coat. There's only one German speaker on the train, so that investigation is going nowhere. We return many times to the middle of the train. The middle train investigator is staying put, but is also thrown off by the whole German thing and tries to come up with a reason for the note. Doesn't make sense. It can't tie into the strange doings so far, so it's a red herring. And he says so the next time the paranoid player turns up in the middle of the train. This causes antagonism between the two players. How do I know you didn't write this note? Maybe you speak German. Well, technically I'd need to read and write the language. This starts an argument about understanding languages, and it gets the players exactly nowhere. The train lumbers on to the next strange doing. That's it, something is happening at the rear of the train. Paranoid player heads for the rear. Middle player stays put. German speaker heads to the front of the train. All areas are covered. Or are they? The villain, meanwhile, sidelined and free to act during the German distraction, is making use of the train's roof. This idea comes late to the players. At the rear of the train, the paranoid player is no closer to understanding the strangeness, still trying to tie it to the German clue. Finally, the middle player snaps. He's watching the wrong suspect. Nothing is happening. So he heads to the back of the train. Something catches his eye, a compartment with the blinds down. In he goes, looking for trouble. Nothing. A careful search and there's no clue, not even a fake German one. The entire sidelined mission stems from character creation. The German-speaking player character could as easily have been a French speaker. Would any of this have happened if the player hadn't chosen an extra language when creating that character? Paranoid player returns to the middle of the train. No sign of the middle player. Something's happened. He must have gone forward, left his post to investigate an occurrence. It should be obvious that gameplay involved kicking players out of the room to deal with each other in turn. This tends to stoke the paranoid atmosphere. Players reunite and learn that they've learned nothing, except that they've learned their characters are still alive and kicking, which is something, I suppose. Now it's time to find out what the middle player's doing. He goes to the end of the train and finds nothing of importance, so he works his way to his post again. There's the paranoid player waiting, facing the other way. Oh, hello. And that's where the adventure jumps off the rails and goes over the symbolic cliff into the ravine. How did you get behind me? What do you mean? No, cut the bullshit. How did you get behind me? Well, I'm just here. But you weren't just here. The last time I left you, you were in the middle of the train. I went to the back of the train. When I came here again, you were gone. But now you come up behind me from the back of the train. How did you do that? What do you mean? I haven't done anything. No. When I left, you were here. Then you were gone. Where did you go? How did you get past me? Were you on the roof? I wasn't on the roof. It's dangerous up there. Paranoid player is more paranoid. Let's check the roof. They go between carriages and check the roof. There are scuff marks and vague footprints up there, as if someone moved around recently. Paranoid player comes back down. What were you doing on the roof? I wasn't on the roof. No, that was you, on the roof, up to something. How did you get past me? I don't know what you mean. The roof's slippy. I'd never go where it's dangerous. Oh, so you know the roof's slippy, from experience. I bet you're a German speaker. Empty your pockets. I want to see if you have a German notebook or a newspaper in German. I don't speak German. Empty your pockets. No. A colossal fist fight breaks out, and the paranoid player wins the battle. He searches the other fellow and finds no sign of a German notebook. Hid it in your luggage. Where's your cabin? Again, there's no sign of a German notebook in the cabin. The German-speaking player, meanwhile, is debating whether or not to dump his own German material. He thinks he's on safe ground, as he's already been identified as someone who knows the language, so technically he's well above suspicion. The German clue is made using disguised handwriting. As a precaution, he burns samples of his own handwriting to be safer from the paranoid player. The paranoid player wants answers. We've played enough adventures in which one player was secretly the villain, so the paranoid player is perfectly right to be paranoid enough to suspect another player. Maybe this is one of those adventures. It isn't. The paranoid player isn't getting answers, so he drags the battered character to the very rear of the train, strips him naked, ties him to the railings, and goes in search of paint. He finds blue paint and returns and paints the tied-up player's battered character, for no reason anyone could understand. It's remained unexplained to this day. That's when the interrogation begins. Meanwhile, free to act more boldly, the cultist is out and about performing his nonsense. The German speaker discovers another atrocity, pulls the emergency cord and walks off the train and out of the adventure. By that time, diverted so wildly by a prank, the players have no hope of uncovering the villain. The adventure developed a jokey nature to it at the wrong moment, and that moment was the questioning scene about a player's location on the train. The middle player didn't take the question seriously. How did you get behind me? He kept laughing it off. It wasn't important, until those footprints were discovered on the roof. All he had to say was, well, I was bored waiting, so I headed to the back of the train, and I saw this compartment with the blinds closed, and I went in. while I was searching for clues, you must have gone past me, heading back to the middle of the train. But no. The adventure took on a life of its own. If they'd spent more time investigating villainy, they'd have had a crack at the villain. That was a one-off adventure with one-off characters, so it didn't matter. Weeks later, when the German player admitted he was the only person on the train who knew German, and he'd manufactured the German clue. Finally, I stopped keeping a straight face on that one. It's the hardest thing to do, and that is a role-playing fact. Written in German on a blood-stained piece of paper, if you care to believe that nonsense on April the 1st or any other day.